We've covered how sorcery has changed the myths and history of the world. We've covered how sorcery has changed all of the creatures of the land, and we've covered how sorcery has changed the humans of this world. The last thing we need to understand is how sorcery has changed the very lands of this world. The North Realm. Mount Helios. There once was a mountain that bewitched all who saw it. It loomed solemn over the land. Its sheer beauty could move the hardest of hearts of tears. The villagers who lived at the foot of this mountain worshipped it as a god. When the villagers had children, they thought of them as blessings from the mountain. When disease spread or crops failed, the villagers thought they must have somehow displeased the mountain. They worshipped the mountain, but they also feared it deeply and profoundly. This fear was etched deep into the ways of the village. Long ago, the villagers' ancestors had witnessed the mountain erupt. Billowing smoke blotted out the sun. Lava surged toward their homes. The mountain was enraged. This was how the villagers' forefathers had explained the calamity, and the stories had been handed down from one generation to the next. One year there was a winter more severe than any the village had known before. Soon the villagers began to succumb to the cold, final sleep. The snow lay thick on the ground, covering the mountain in a mantle of purest white. All the villagers were of a mind. This wall of white resembled nothing less than the pallor of a dying man. Could it be that the mountain itself was dying? Was the majestic mountain slipping away? The villagers concluded this to be the cause of the cruel winter. They were helpless. All they could do was watch their mountain die. But one of the villagers was different. Yes, he believed that the mountain had brought about this icy winter, but this man, perceptive in the way that only the truly odd can be, believed there was something to be done about it. He decided that they needed to anger the mountain. What was called for now was precisely the kind of terrible eruption their forefathers had once witnessed. If the mountain erupted, then surely the lava would melt the snow and warmth would return to the world. The other villagers desperately tried to dissuade him, warning him that this solution was far too simplistic, but he would not heed their words. The man set off up the mountain in the middle of a raging blizzard. As he trekked up the slopes, he cursed at the mountain, hurling abuse at the top of his voice. He hoped to enrage the mountain, telling it he was not afraid and it to do its worst. But the mountain gave not the slightest response. It seemed the man would pay for his recklessness with his life. Lost on the snowy slopes, the cold had soaked through his bones. But then, as his life was draining away, a mysterious light appeared before him. He saw a curious chalice floating in the air, and a strange voice spoke to him. Your wish will be granted if you are prepared to pay the price. The man agreed to the voice's demands and felt the blood flowing back into his frozen limbs. Doing as he had been told, he headed towards the crater at the mountain's summit, then cast himself into the crater. Soon the mountain began to rumble and the ground started to shake. Powerful plumes of smoke shot into the air. The mountain was erupting just as he had desired. Lava flowed down the slopes of the mountain, but the village was unharmed. Perhaps this too was his intention. The mountain's eruption had banished the cold. The villagers were grateful to the man for having saved them. He had done what he had said he would. He had made the mountain erupt. The villagers had no idea how he had managed it. All they knew was that he had saved them all. But the man who had saved the village had not died. He had sacrificed his body, yet his spirit lived on and had become one with the mountain itself. And so he watched over his village day and night. Many years passed. The villagers went about their everyday lives, and all memory of the terrible winter faded. They forgot all about the man they had once hailed as their savior. This enraged the spirit of the man. Now the mountain could truly be said to be angry. It erupted on a scale that dwarfed anything that had come before. Black smoke reached up to the clouds, and the village at the mountain's base was engulfed by molten lava. Such was the man's fury. His face appeared on the mountain's surface, distorted in a mask of rage. This mountain became known as Mount Helios, its anger still unappeased to this day. Leviathan, land. This is the same story we've already heard about the Leviathan, the monster. Valhalla Abbey. The region's people had long worshipped a god of the land. Women of faith in particular gathered together to lead lives of cooperation and worship. One such gathering was the Valhalla Abbey. The sisters of the Abbey were possessed of a deep mercy seldom seen in mankind. The endless cycle of war throughout history stands as a testament to that. One particularly fierce conflict broke out on the Abbey's doorstep. The sisters wandered the battlefield in search of wounded soldiers to care for. Friend or foe, it mattered not, all were equal in their need. Though they tended the injured with great urgency, too many suffered to the last. The sisters mourned each passing as they would a son. Please end this war. Let peace make haste. Such were the fervent prayers they offered as they worked. But the war raged on, heedless, and casualties grew with each passing day. In time, the sisters came to doubt their god's existence. Why else would a divine being stand idle as so many lives were lost? Why else would a god withhold salvation despite their pleas? Finally, the day came that their faith reached its nadir, a mysterious chalice. It spoke unto the sisters of the abbey, "Pay the price, and your wish shall be made true." The women gladly offered their own bodies. If God would not save these men, they would see it done themselves. They spun their flesh into fiber, their bones into bandages, and with these strange shrouds they enveloped the wounded. The sight was less a sick bed than a cocoon. Within them, the warriors' broken bodies were made whole again. The sisters held faith that in time these men would awaken and emerge. So selfless were these women that the cocoons soon outnumbered the living sisters. Before long, only two remained. One was the youngest of the order, the other a scant 2 years older. The eldest of the two spoke. "Someone must remain," said she, "to aid these men when they awaken. I leave them in your care." And so it was that the youngest became the last. She lived on, standing vigil by the soldiers' cocoons. But the cocoons lay still. Years passed, and the youngest sister was young no more. In truth, the soldiers had long since awakened. It was not slumber that kept them still, but the overwhelming comfort of their silken nests. For it was not only their bones that had been broken by war. The slaughter they had witnessed carved deep scars within the pit of their souls. They had seen enough, too much, and though the miraculous cocoons might mend their bodies, they could not undo the damage inside. Upon coming to this revelation, this younger sister despaired. Too many long years had passed for her to start anew. She had her health, yes, but lacked the will to seek out a new path in life. Though blood yet coursed through her veins, a life without feeling is but a living death. She had become as the men who lingered still within their silken wombs. As the weight of hopelessness bore down upon her, she slumped against a nearby cocoon. Its fibers parted to accept her into its warm embrace, never to wake again. It was a suicide of sorts, and yet she felt no pain, experienced no loss. Word of the now abandoned abbey spread, and it became the site of a grim new pilgrimage. Even now, people flock to these deserted halls in search of this lukewarm limbo. The Icarus Pasture. This is the tale of a famous pasture and the talented breeder who owned it. The pasture had long been known for its champion horses, and even the local lord would occasionally visit to pick one out. When the lord's son was almost of age, the father decided to present son with a horse from the pasture. The white horse chosen was the finest the pasture had ever produced. They were certain that the lord's son would be delighted. The son, however, had other ideas. He told the breeder that in a distant land he had seen horses that could fly. "That's the kind of horse I want," he said. The son's announcement greatly disturbed the breeder, as he'd never heard of these flying horses. Of course, the lord's son had been lying. Spoiled rotten from the day he was born, he had developed into a nasty, spiteful young man. He had simply wanted to see the breeder's reaction when faced with an impossible request. The breeder, diligent to a fault, responded to the son's request, and he did all others, by trying to make it a reality. The breeder assembled all types of animals, dissecting them carefully in order to examine their physical structure. Based on research, he created model wings of various creatures: birds, butterflies, moths, bats, dragonflies, locusts, even houseflies, and attached these to his horses in a vain hope of making the beasts fly. Unfazed by failure, he resolved instead to tear the wings off living eagles and affix them to the bodies of growing fowls. After countless failures, the breeder eventually gave up. As he sank into despair, a strange white light appeared before him. It was a chalice. "I can give you what you want," it said, "but you must give me something in return. The greater your offering, the greater your reward." The breeder obeyed the chalice's command. He decided on the greatest offering he could make, his prize white horse. The steed dissolved into viscous wax-like liquid, white in color. Soon after, a pair of wings sprouted from the wax. If he put these wax wings onto a horse, would it be able to fly? Sure enough, the Lord's son was delighted with his flying horse. The pasture's reputation grew even further. Naturally, there was a great deal of interest in the breeder's flying horses. He was selling the creatures almost as fast as he could produce them. Eventually, the wax that produced the wings ran out, but the breeder, unperturbed, simply sacrificed another white steed, one reared in anticipation of this very moment. A fresh pile of magical wax oozed onto the grass of his pasture. The breeder, plucking the wings from the wax, looked like a farmer harvesting a crop. Before long, curiosity got the better of him, and he tried attaching the wings to things other than horses. He produced flying dogs, flying sheep, even a flying house. Then one day the breeder looked up from his work to see his pasture surrounded by the Lord's soldiers. They were there to arrest him. "Why am I being arrested?" asked the bewildered breeder. "The murder of the Lord's son," came the reply. It transpired that the Lord's son had become very fond of his flying horse, and hardly a day went past when they did not take to the skies together. Predictably, being able to fly had not been enough for the spoiled young man. However, he wanted to see how high he could fly. As he soared ever higher, ever closer to the sun, the horse's wings began to melt and could no longer support his weight. He plummeted to his death from a great height. The breeder was held responsible and executed. His pasture was left to go to seed. Many people have stolen the magical wax, but only the breeder knows how to use it, and the secret stays with him. Resplendent Rapunzel. In a town, all children were born with beautiful gold hair. Golden-haired families lived in every house. Some suggested the town's isolation meant few people moved there from elsewhere, added to which the rare blood of the townsfolk didn't take well to mingling with that of outsiders. Each of the townsfolk looked a veritable angel, every head crowned with flowing golden locks. The women were especially striking in their beauty. To some, it sounded like a garden of paradise where only paragons of beauty dwelt. Stories of the town spread far and wide, embellished and exaggerated. Of course, the wicked, the wealthy, and the avaricious soon heard of the town and its inhabitants, and would-be Lotharios arrived to claim these beauties for themselves. Before long, the town was beset by a plague of kidnappings. Of course, the fathers did not stand idly by and allow their daughters to be taken from them. They tried to fight back, but the kidnappers were ruthless brigands. They treated those who resisted without mercy. The men who tried to protect their daughters were slain to the last man. Wives lost husbands, daughters lost fathers. Amidst the horror, one mother made a desperate plea. "Take my life," she prayed. "It doesn't matter. Just spare my daughters. Please give them a place where they can finally be safe from harm." And at that moment, a strange miracle occurred. A white chalice floated before her, and a voice spoke directly into her mind. "If you are prepared to pay the price, your wish will be granted," it said. Even as the mother whispered her assent, her body began to change. Her neck stretched and grew as startled onlookers watched. It grew higher than the house, taller than the trees that stood about. No one could believe what they were witnessing. The mother's head also began to change, her skull turning into a house that would become her daughter's haven. Aloft in the sky, her daughters would be safe from the pillagers and kidnappers. When her daughters wished to go out, the mother would let down her golden hair like a ladder. But when outsiders threatened, she would raise it again so no one could climb up. It was the perfect place to escape and be safe. The other mothers saw how well it worked and followed suit. Soon the whole town was awash with these strange dwellings. The kidnappers were thwarted at last. Peace returned to the town. Now in this town of beauties, there was one who was even more beautiful than the rest. Her mother too had sacrificed herself to become a refuge for her beloved daughter. She was protective, perhaps excessively so. Her daughter was only allowed to descend to the ground but once a day. The woman chafed against her lack of freedom. She wanted to spend her days like any other young woman of her age. More than anything, she wanted to fall in love. And so the beautiful young daughter lied to the mother. She claimed to be sick and in need of medicine. The mother, not suspecting a thing, let down her hair so that the daughter could climb to the ground. Kidnappers had long since ceased to trouble the town, so no doubt the mother felt there was little danger. After that, the daughter started telling more lies so she could continue to enjoy the freedom of the world outside. Then finally, she found what she had been looking for. She fell in love. The man who her affections the man who won her affections was a traveler who had been passing near the town. He was a common sort without any particular charm, but for the sheltered girl, he was good enough. After all, the man was not important. He was just a means to an end. What she truly loved was love itself. The mother soon learned of the affair and flew into a rage over the foolishness of her daughter. What folly! She knew nothing of the man or what his true motives might be. The mother was determined to protect her daughter from herself. She stretched her neck higher and higher until her head brushed the clouds. She had no intention of letting her daughter down to the ground ever again. But is there any stronger force than that which binds two people in love? Abandoned on the surface, the traveler fell into despair. But then before his eyes, the white chalice appeared. He could pursue his love by the same means that the mother kept her from him, if he was willing to make the sacrifice. He could reach her. He was, and rapidly his neck began to grow and grow. The mother saw this and tried to flee, but the traveler would not give up. Both of them stretched their necks up and up, ever skyward, using all their strength. And that is how the bizarre, terrible tower appeared in the town. It was made of two necks coiled gruesomely around each other, stretching high into the sky. Thank you for listening.